Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and men who are tall. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Phantasm. This 1979 science fantasy horror follows Mike, a young boy who discovers that his town's local mortician may be killing residents and turning them into evil little henchmen. He enlists the reluctant help of his older brother Jody and an ice cream man named Reggie, and the three sneak into the tall man's lair to take down the otherworldly entity for good. Phantasm was written and directed by Don Coscarelli, who has brought us films like Beastmaster, Bubba Hotep, and John Dies at the End. Phantasm is probably his most famous film, and he's gone on to direct parts 2, 3, and 4 as well. This was Coscarelli's first foray into horror, and he took a lot of inspiration from his own fascination with the funeral industry and practices, and our own relationships with death. Many of the ideas for Phantasm were developed from nightmares Coscarelli had as a teenager, in which he was chased down a long corridor by a flying chrome sphere which he feared would drill his brain out. Yep, that sounds about right. Phantasm was a very low-budget, independent project, with Coscarelli working a lot of roles himself, hiring a lot of family and friends, and having to actually shoot on weekends with rented equipment. He was the writer, director, cameraman, and editor simply because it was his project and he didn't have the money to hire people to do some of those jobs. The film stars A. Michael Baldwin from Phantasm 3, 4, and 5 as Mike Pearson, Bill Thornbury from Phantasm 3, 4, and 5 as Jody Pearson, Reggie Bannister from Phantasm 2, 3, 4, and 5, as well as Bubba Hotep and Wishmaster as Reggie, and of course Angus Scrim from Phantasm 2, 3, 4, and 5, as well as Chopping Mall, Wishmaster, and Subspecies as the Tall Man. As you can probably tell, it's a tight-knit group of fellas that have worked on this franchise with Coscarelli all the way up to the 5th film. Each of them has gone on to have careers outside of it, but this is definitely where they found their home. The script changed a lot throughout filmmaking, with a lot of rewrites and improvisation making its way into the final product. Since the filming was done on weekends, they would shoot as much as they possibly could, sometimes going for 20 hours a day. Filming took over a year due to this timeline, and post-production took another 8 months because there was so many changes it was hard to piece the thing together. Phantasm is often described as barely linear, and I'm now starting to realize that while it was definitely a conceptual choice, it was also somewhat out of necessity. The recent success of Halloween had distribution studios buying up films left and right, with Embassy Pictures purchasing Phantasm for a theatrical run. It ended up grossing $22 million on just a $300,000 budget, proving to be a big success, although it was met with pretty mixed reviews from critics. Some described it as well-paced, eerie, and nightmarish, while others found it to be meandering and lacking technical skill. I'd say it's only gained popularity throughout the years though, with more and more people coming to appreciate its unique premise and idiosyncratic approach. It currently has a 74 and 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 3.4 on Letterboxd, so it's clear the film has some love. Phantasm is actually one of my dad's favorites. He wasn't big into slashers or possession kind of movies, but certain creature features like Predator and Pumpkinhead, as well as more sci-fi fantasy horror like Phantasm, ended up playing in my house a lot as a kid. But the only one I've seen a fair amount is the original, and I've only seen Phantasm 2 a couple of times, and I've never seen 3, 4, or 5, so I'm excited to finally give this full franchise my time and attention. Thank you so much to my patrons for voting for Phantasm to be the first franchise I cover in 2024. I think this is going to be a lot of fun and a good way to start off the year. But with all that said, it's probably time we get started. You boys better stay out of the cemetery, because we're watching Phantasm. The movie opens in the Morningside Cemetery in Oregon, where a local fella named Tommy is knocking boots with this enthusiastic blonde lady. But before his post-nut clarity can kick in, she whips out a dagger and stabs him. You just got tall man, sucka. We jump to Tommy's funeral, which Jody Pearson is attending. He runs into his buddy Reggie, and the two wonder why their friend would commit suicide. Jody heads into the absolutely gorgeous funeral home where he notices some strange sounds throughout the building. He visits his parents in the mortuary who died about 2 years ago. Next we meet Jody's younger brother Mike, who is dirt biking his way through the cemetery. He hears the same strange sounds as Jody and notices some cloaked figures hiding behind the tombstones. Jody follows the sounds through the huge funeral home and glimpses the same cloaked figure, but he's interrupted by the funeral director.
The funeral is about to begin, sir.
We learn Jody didn't let Mike attend the funeral as he had nightmares for weeks after seeing their parents in their caskets. Little do they know Mike has snuck in to observe the funeral from afar, and he watches as the boys pay their respects. But Mike hangs around after the funeral where he watches the tall man single-handedly load Tommy back into the hearse instead of into the ground. He visits the local fortune teller, who is a decrepit old lady who apparently speaks through her granddaughter. He's recently learned that Jody plans on leaving again and he's come to seek her wisdom. He's been home taking care of Mike since their parents passed, but he's planning on taking him to live with their aunt so he can get back on the road again. Granny says Jody will definitely take Mike with him when he leaves. Is she psychic or just an optimist? Next he tells them about the tall man who seemed to telekinetically knock Mike off his bike while he was fleeing. Granny wants to play a little game, otherwise known as telling a little boy to put his hand in a mysterious box. The thing clamps on and starts to hurt him, and it isn't until he lets go of his fear that the box lets go of his hand. Fear is the killer, Michael. It is all in your mind. Okay, bye! We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a live jam sesh between Jody and Reggie.
You see, my lady left me lonely. Yes, she did.
This tuning fork might be foreshadowing or something. For some reason, the fortune teller's granddaughter is snooping around the funeral home now, but when she opens a mysterious door, she screams and is never seen again. That night, Jody picks up a familiar-looking blonde at the bar, which his creepy little brother has followed him to. Mike follows them to the cemetery because of course, and he watches as the two start getting frisky. But before Mike can truly develop some kind of complex, he hears some monstrous noises, and he's jumped by the cloaked figure. Jody follows his screaming little brother and eventually catches up with him, and he doesn't buy Mike's story about monsters in the cemetery. He sends the imaginative little perv home in the car, but fortunately the lady in lavender is gone when he returns. That night, Mike dreams that the tall man is standing over him in bed and a couple zombies pop out of the ground to eat him. The next day, he once again follows his brother to Dune's cantina, but while he's putzing around town, Mike notices the tall man absolutely strutting his stuff. Aw shit, I think he sees you, Mike. If not, he can definitely smell you, or maybe that's just the ice cream. That night, Mike's seemingly endless amount of mechanic work is interrupted by more cloaked creatures, and they ain't here to drink those delicious Dos Equis. They hop onto the car and jump around until a jack gives out, but fortunately the scrawny king is unharmed. They're gone when Jody returns, who still doesn't believe him. Well, I guess there's only one thing to do, Mike. Stab that mortician! He makes his way through the cemetery and breaks into the funeral home, where he checks out all of the newest, hottest caskets on the market. He hides inside one when this guy, simply known as the caretaker, wanders in, seemingly aware that someone's in there. The tall man collects him before he can open it, though. Mike wanders through the evil lair and makes his way to the evil door, but before he can open it, he's attacked by a flying metal sphere. Mike manages to duck and avoid the ball, but the caretaker comes around the corner and grabs him. The sphere comes rushing around the corner, showing off some secret blades, but Mike bites the caretaker to free himself. The ball stabs right into his head and inserts a drill into his skull, harvesting those sweet, delicious brains. The tall man emerges.
Oh shit.
And Mike bolts in an attempt to escape. He chases Mike through the funeral home before the kid is able to lock him out of a storage room, accidentally slamming the door on his hand. Mike wastes 0 time before chopping off his fingers, which spew with Velveeta cheese. He collects one of the severed fingers and starts leaving, only to be chased by 2 of the cloaked creatures. He's able to narrowly escape once again, though. The good news is he finally has the physical evidence to prove his wild stories to Jody, who plans to take the finger to the sheriff. But alas, the finger is transformed into a demonic housefly. Mike manages to swaddle it in his jacket, which means we're treated to 2 actors pretending to wrestle a balled up shirt. They put the fucker into the garbage disposal just as Reggie shows up for some reason, and the durable beast attacks again. This time the combo of garbage disposal plus stabbing is enough to kill it, and they fill Reggie in on what's been going on. Jody leaves to scope out the funeral home, leaving Mike at home with a trusty shotgun. He sneaks inside using the window Mike broke earlier, but he's ambushed by a Jawa. The little bastard gives Jody a bite, but he manages to blow its brains out. He loads a few more bullets into it and heads for his car, only to have the hearse follow him out. Mike rolls up in the Cuda, who drives nice and slow so the hearse can catch up to them. They realize nobody is driving, so Jody opts to shoot at the engine in an attempt to shut it down. It works! Turns out it was one of the little guys behind the wheel who's been impaled on a tree branch. They remove his hood to reveal that the creature is actually Tommy, who has somehow been shrunk. They call up Reggie and load Tommy into his ice cream truck, and they return home to make sense of these bizarre discoveries. Why shrink bodies down to half the size? Have Jody and Mike's parents been turned into little hellions? Should they just curb stomp the tall man? So many good questions. Reggie drops Mike off at an antique shop their friend Sally works at, where he finds an old ass photo of the tall man. Oh shit, how you doing, handsome? For some reason, this makes Mike demand that he be taken home. Meanwhile, it sounds like Tommy has woken up in Reggie's truck, and Jody is having visions of the tall man inside of the funeral home. Rah! On the way home, Mike comes across Reggie's crashed truck, and both he and the creature are nowhere to be found. Sally just sits there while the minions open up the passenger door and load into the car, and they proceed to just generally beat the shit out of the group. Mike gets yeeted out of the car, at which point Sally finally drives away, taking the little monsters with her. The little lad jogs home and shares that Sally, Sue, and Reggie are all probably dead. Jody decides he's heading back to Morningside, locking the angry Mike in his bedroom with a screwdriver. Jesus, easy with that shotgun shell, kid. He really haphazardly jerry-rigs a boomstick to blow a hole in the door, so after arming up, he quickly heads out to follow Jody. Oh, fuck.
I've been waiting for you.
He tosses Mike into the hearse, but he doesn't realize the brat is strapped. Mike blows out one of the tires to slow down the hearse, and he shoots out the back windshield for an easy escape. And then the hearse crashes and explodes. Nice. He heads inside and finds his father's coffin, which Jody was just looking at earlier, which unfortunately doesn't have him inside. Rip. One of those pesky spheres starts flying towards him, but Jody shows up and blows the thing to smithereens. The boys then run into Reggie, who was apparently able to sneak Sally, Sue, and a few other kidnapped people out of the funeral home. Good job, Reggie. They head into the mysterious room and find a bunch of drums and what resembles a giant tuning fork. No Tarman in these canisters though, just a bunch of dwarves. Mike remembers his lesson about fear and starts fucking with the tuning fork, which sucks him into another dimension. Look at all those dwarves. Fortunately, Jody was able to grab him by the belt and pull him back in before he went too far though. Mike realizes that the tall man is some kind of alien and he's turning people into dwarves to use them as slaves on his own planet. they need to be little because the pressure's different there. Sure, why the fuck not? This is the doorway to his planet, and this stack is the next shipment. Oh shit, lights out. The boys somehow get very separated in the dark, with both Jody and Mike somehow leaving this room. Reggie sticks around and thinks about his tuning fork, deciding to touch both cylinders at once to alter the vibrations. Jody is somehow outside and about to be shanked by the tall man, but he senses when Reggie touches the tuning fork. This turns on a wind tunnel that sucks the barrels into the other world, but Reggie is able to crawl away. Somehow Mike is outside too, and even Reggie joins in on the outdoor fun as a serious wind kicks up. The ice cream man finds the lady in lavender and tries to help her, not knowing her true identity, giving the tall man the opportunity to stab him. The brothers reunite, but unfortunately Reggie bleeds out and dies here. The boys flee in the Cuda as the funeral home pulsates and disappears. Jody comes up with a plan to trap the tall man in an abandoned mine shaft, but of course he leaves Mike at home again, so his little brother gets attacked.
Boy!
Mike flees towards the mines with the tall man not far behind.
You play a good game, boy. But the game is finished. Now you die.
And he manages to overcome a variety of scary things like his parents' tombstones, some zombie hands, and Little Miss Shank along the way. He successfully leads the tall man right into the disguised mine shaft, and the big bastard plummets down. Jody drops some big-ass boulders to plug up the exit, but this isn't the happy ending you may have expected. Mike suddenly wakes in the night and tells Reggie that the rocks won't hold the tall man, but Reggie has no idea what he's talking about and believes he just had a nightmare. Turns out basically everything we've seen is a dream. Mike's parents are dead, but it turns out that Jody is as well, as they just had his funeral last week. Reggie assures him that this supposed tall man didn't kill his brother, Jody simply died in a car accident. Reggie tells Mike that he isn't alone, promising that he will take care of him from now on. He suggests that they leave town for a few weeks to get away from all this sorrow for a bit, and tells Mike to pack his bag. But after looking at a picture of Jody in his room, it becomes clear that this may not have been just a dream after all.
Boy!
And that's Phantasm. Oh boy, this one is a lot of fun. The cinematography, the score, the sound design, the lighting, the set design all add to this really dreamlike quality that the film possesses. It captures that unnameable, unknowable kind of fear you feel as a kid after waking up from a nightmare as you look around your dark room wondering if something is under your bed or in your closet. The tall man and his devious inventions are really childish and simple while also being deceptively adult and complex as well. The transforming of corpses into shrunken interdimensional slaves is so unexpected by the start of the film, but it manages to take us there without falling off the rails too often. I'm still very creeped out by the fact he's strutting around town seducing men as the lady in lavender and literally fucking them in the cemetery just to kill them and add more Jawas to his army. Mike really makes the perfect protagonist for this story. He touches on the innocence of childhood and the rougher side of adolescence, allowing him to notice the things that go bump in the night that Jody and the other adults seem to look past. He wants to be treated like an adult and as an equal, but he's also constantly clinging to his older brother like a scared, lost little boy. Oh, I should also mention that I'm going to strictly talk about the film as though I've never seen any of the sequels before or know what's going to happen later down the line. I have done some homework on what's to come just so I could get a general flow of this franchise, and it's clear to me that each film expands on the last one in a lot of different ways, including the tall man's abilities and motives. But in this original film, he truly is an enigma. Mike has this idea that the resurrected, shrunken corpses are slaves on another planet, and that one guess is the only real hint we're given. His whole character is kind of like being chased in a nightmare. You have no idea what the thing chasing you really wants, but you know it's not good and you need to run away from it. But there is a really ambiguous nature to the entire film, as so many questions are left unanswered by the end of it. Was it all a dream fabricated by Mike to deal with the trauma and grief of losing his parents and brother? Or did all of those events happen and that ending was the only part that was a dream? Phantasm 2 gives us a kind of concrete answer, but if we ignore that for now, it really is up to the audience's interpretation. And I've actually come to appreciate this more depressing possibility in which Mike has really lost everyone that he loves and is struggling to cope. The tall man is the town's undertaker, who presumably handled all of his family's autopsies, embalmings, funerals, and burials. Death is a terrifying and mysterious thing for a child, and Mike is trying to make sense of all these bizarre procedures while dealing with an immense loss. He fears his deceased loved ones aren't being treated the way that they should, and his childlike imagination has led him down this wild, bloody conspiracy. And I find there to be little nods to this idea all throughout the film. The hearse crash is basically a stand-in for the car crash that killed Jody, and his fear of Jody leaving is a metaphor for Jody literally being dead and gone. Dark stuff. Not to mention that Reggie, aside from Tommy and the random-ass caretaker, is the only one who concretely dies on screen. If he is the one looking over Mike in real life, it makes sense that his biggest fear is losing him next. But the ending, plus the fact there are 4 sequels, pretty clearly indicates that the tall man is probably a bit more than just a figment of Mike's imagination. Angus Scrimm turns in a fantastic performance as the tall man. He's able to add so much to the character with simple facial expressions and mannerisms. He has so little dialogue in this, but everything he says is super memorable and quotable. I also have a weird soft spot for horror movies consisting of little ensemble groups of men. For me, they're just a lot of fun to watch. Predator is a primetime example of what I'm talking about, although the machismo is turned down a bit here in Phantasm. But Mike, Jody, and Reggie are all just these run-of-the-mill buddies, and I love the throwaway scenes of them playing music and fixing up the CUDA. Plus, there are these little nuances in their dialogue that make them feel really real and genuine, like the fact that they keep referring to the tall man as that mother. I can understand if Phantasm is a bit too slow or a bit too unresolved by the end for some people. If you prefer a wrapped up, pretty cathartic kind of ending, this might be a tough pill to swallow. There are also moments where the movie's age and low budget are pretty apparent. I love the boys in this, but they are not exactly Oscar-worthy performances at times. The dwarves stay hidden pretty much the whole film, as there was clearly no special effects budget available to reveal them. And that fly scene comes off as pretty silly nowadays. Oh, a bit unrelated, but what the fuck was up with the fortune teller? What's her deal? I do know there are some vague answers that come way later in the franchise, but she really is this bizarre little inclusion here. All in all though, I have a lot of love and respect for Phantasm. Seeing what Coscarelli and his friends were able to accomplish over a bunch of weekends with rented equipment is really impressive and inspiring. It ultimately feels more like a low-budget B-movie than a heady existential experience some of the time, which may turn off the more pretentious, elevated horror kind of fan, but I personally think it adds a lot of charm to the flick. It has some great characters, some really unique kills, and introduces what would become one of horror's most beloved villains. It has inspired a slew of films that borrow from the "it was all a dream" kind of twist, and even directly inspired the final scene in A Nightmare on Elm Street. While I do think the film is still underknown and underappreciated by wider audiences, its impact on the horror genre is hard to ignore. If you haven't seen it before, I'd recommend grabbing a 6-pack of beer, waiting till it gets late, and just having a good time with it. It's a lot of fun. Well, that's about it. What do y'all think of Phantasm? Let me know down below. There's so much good stuff to appreciate here, so please share your theories, thoughts, and takeaways down in the comments. Soon we'll be looking at Phantasm 2, but first I've got to check out a patron request. Join me in 2 weeks as we check out VHS 85, the first film from 2023 to get a review on the channel. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Phantasm. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews, and if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.